Hey everyone, let me just readjust here. Welcome to day 1 of our What About Wellbeing live stream series. So today we are talking all about the pressure of perfectionism. And it's a really useful one to cover. So I'm just bringing it up on my laptop so I can make sure I see any comments as we go. If you are catching this live, definitely say hey. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear how you're finding this, if you have any questions. If you are watching the replay, same thing. I'll just get back to you in that time. So, perfectionism. So when we talk about perfectionism, really the issue with perfectionism is that we are placing a conditional element of acceptance for ourselves, of love for ourselves, or we are in the belief that other people's love or care or acceptance of us is conditional as well. And that is really, really shitty. It's a shitty way to live because it means that we aren't accepting all of ourselves. We aren't seeing and showing up in what we do have to offer, or allowing ourselves to simply be loved, whether it is love by ourselves and accepted by ourselves, or loved and accepted by others as well. So when our perfectionism shows up in our well-being practice, sometimes that can be, if I'm not showing up perfectly, I don't deserve to be accepted, or I don't accept myself in that instance. And that's a tricky one because it makes us seek the impossible. It makes us go, I have to reach and achieve the impossible in order to be loved and accepted in this life by whomever or whatever. And if I don't reach that or achieve that, then I don't get to experience that. That is the basis of perfectionism when it comes to how we show up and how we allow ourselves to be and show up as well. And with well-being, because there is so many different ways to tend to your well-being. First and foremost, there are 1,000 million trillion gajillion different ways to approach your unique well-being. And I say unique because it is unique to each of us, and within that, it's unique to each of our circumstances or each of our situations or each of how we feel in that moment. And that is a really important thing to remember as well, because we can't put a blanket on well-being and say, this is good for everyone. I can't even say that about yoga. Yoga is a wonderful modality. There are different kinds of yoga, and I would suggest that certain kinds of yoga, more so restorative kinds, are hugely beneficial for most people, but it doesn't mean that it's beneficial for everyone. It doesn't mean that that is an appropriate well-being practice for everyone, depending on how their brain functions or what's going on for them, and that in itself. So it's being clear that well-being isn't one thing, nor is well-being one thing that you need to aspire to, as far as how you approach it for your own needs. And in this world of the visuals that we see on things like Instagram, where there are so many visuals of, with yoga as the example, the perfect yoga pose. And Instagram yoga is beautiful. It can be inspiring. It can give you ideas. It can be amazing in certain ways. But when we take that as the only way to be, it becomes injurious to our own sense of self and our own well-being. And that is not useful either. So there is no one way to approach your well-being. Getting back to that. So if there's no one way to approach your well-being, there's no one way that you can be perfect at it, because it has to be right for you, and it will change. There are some days that what my normal go-to well-being practices aren't suitable, aren't going to work for me for whatever reason. I may need something completely different. May need to move my body completely differently, because on a somatic level it needs to shift rather than come to stillness. Or I may need something that's guided some days, whereas other days I just need to be quiet for my well-being. So you can see that when what serves us in each moment is constantly shifting and changing, it is impossible to reach perfectionism. And I think that's a good thing, because perfectionism isn't really what we should be aspiring to anyway. Perfectionism isn't useful for us to aspire to because of these things, because it places conditional acceptance and love upon ourselves. Whereas the idea of well-being is really to be in a state where you can still be growing, you can still be learning and changing and all of these different things, but the idea is to still bring yourself to a state of acceptance for where you're at right now and love for your journey there on the way, because that makes a huge difference as well. It makes a huge difference in how we feel about ourselves, about how we feel about where we're at in our lives, about how we feel where we're at in our goals, whatever our goals are, whether it's got something to do with eating healthier or for our bodies, another unique thing, or, moving in a better way for ourselves, or creating environments that serve us rather than ones that make us feel small and limited and trapped. Trapped is a big word as well. So when we place pressure of perfectionism upon ourselves, we are automatically setting ourselves up to fail, because perfectionism, perfect doesn't exist, but also because what serves us is changing in each moment. And I'll get to that as well, because that can feel really confusing as well. But when what serves us best is changing in each moment, it's changing the goalposts. If you look at it from a perfectionism angle, if you're trying to be perfect at everything, so you're aiming for these goalposts over here, but those goalposts are changing constantly based on what serves you most in that moment, it is going to be impossible to reach them. So we are already setting ourselves up to fail if we approach perfectionism in that, if we approach it from that position of needing to be perfect. The other issue with perfectionism is that we can then fall into the trap of then not doing anything, because it's impossible to be perfect, right? So that's another element. It's impossible to be perfect. We can admit that, we can know that. But if we are still trying to be perfect, we get ourselves into this trap of, well, shit, I can't be perfect, so I'm just not going to do anything because I can't do any of it right, quote unquote right. And if you can't do, and if I can't do any of it right, then what's the use? Why bother? And how many of us have fallen into that trap in various, it could be with our well-being, it could be with study that we might be doing, it could be with anything really that in its way that it shows up as. How much does it get in our way? How much do we not do because we're trying to be perfect at it? And how shitty do we feel about ourselves because we're not doing it and because we're not perfect at it? So it's a double whammy of shitty. So there is that pressure of perfectionism that we place on ourselves. And when we get into that paralysis by analysis, because we look at the thing, we go, I want to be perfect at this, because we still are telling ourselves that we need to be perfect at something. I want to be perfect at this, but I can't be. It's too much, or I don't know where to start, or maybe there's some kind of cognitive acknowledgement of I cannot be perfect at this. So there's a cognitive acknowledgement, but it's not embodied on a somatic level yet. We can get there. But when there's a cognitive acknowledgement of I cannot be perfect at this because perfection doesn't exist, but we are still trying to be perfect and reach perfection, we just stop doing altogether sometimes. We just sit there and go, nah, screw this, way too much. I'm just going to continue along with what's comfortable, which is doing nothing. And then we feel shitty because it's a cycle. We know what we want to be doing, or we know how we want to be feeling. We're not feeling it because we don't feel like we can reach it perfectly, or we can practice well-being perfectly. And in this series, it's a 3-day live stream that I wanted to bring to you because I feel like these elements that we're exploring each day are really important to bring light to, because they're the things that get out our way. Whether you're at the beginning of your well-being journey, or whether you have already been on it for however long, whether you have an idea of it already or not, these are the things that stop us. These are the things that when we cross any hurdle, or when we get too much information, which is tomorrow's topic. Tomorrow's topic is about information overload and not knowing what's relevant to us. So we either try everything, or again, we stall because we hit that paralysis. But when we are continually striving for something that is not achievable because we don't understand what is useful for us, it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy of defeat. But it's self-defeatism. It's getting in our own ways instead of getting out of our own ways. It's expecting so much of ourselves because we expect to know it all by ourselves. We might expect to be able to figure it all out by ourselves. We might feel like we should. There's another favorite word of mine, should. We should know better, or we should know how to do the thing or figure the thing out, or we should be able to whatever, right? They are all elements of trying to be perfect at something that doesn't even exist in the realm of perfection, because it really is just treating ourselves as we need to in each moment. So with our well-being practice, well-being is encapsulated beyond just how you eat, and beyond just how you move your body, and beyond even, as much as I love them, the face masks and the Epsom salt baths and the candles and the things, which are amazing as well. They are beautiful practices, and I'm not discounting them because sometimes they are the practices we need. But our well-being goes beyond that, because it's an internal process. It's an internal understanding. It's understanding what it is we need in any aspects of our lives, rather than just placing maybe the Band-Aid over it, or the salve, the soothing balm that soothes us otherwise. So our well-being can be, as I mentioned, the environment we're in. I've done a video before on how there is stress, and it's usually unconscious because it's so subtle, stress about environments. So it's environmental stress that can play a role in how we're feeling and what's going on for us, because if we're not looking at our environment as an element to our well-being, we miss the red flags or the cues that something needs to be adjusted or something could feel better for us. So environment is a big one. If you've ever been like me and you've lived with people that feel really challenging to live with. If you've lived with people that maybe don't respect your space or your belongings or your energetic space, you know, they keep asking of you without asking, they just almost demand it. They walk in and take up the room energetically. You'll know what I'm talking about. If they try to control everything, even everything that's yours, you'll know what I'm talking about. And you'll also know if you've experienced moving away from that place into a different space that gives you space to breathe and to be and to have time out and respects you and your belongings and your pets and how you want to exist in the space as well. That's the environment. Same with workplaces. Doesn't just have to be living situations. Same with workplaces. What environments do you spend your time in? Climate plays a role. So there's all of these different things that help take care of our well-being. And that is one of those key things. Another one is the kind of work that we are doing. How we work best to thrive, which is one of my favorite. Thriving was my word for the year. It still is, actually. It's come about in an interesting way. Morning, Linda. Thanks for joining. It's come about in an interesting way, for sure, but it's looking at how we work best, how we structure our day in our work, how we do the things in a work-related sense, in a way that is least stressful for us. That can be a well-being aspect. Another one can be how we think, what demands we place on our brains. That's a huge one. Perfectionism itself is a demand that we place on our brains. Another one can be how we socialize. This is a big one that I feel like I knew, but I'm kind of learning on a whole new level lately as well, is how we socialize, when we can socialize, and how much time we need between socializing to just be with ourselves. Because some of us really thrive just going from social engagement to social engagement to social engagement. Some of us really thrive from having a social engagement and then just doing our own thing, and then coming back and being social and doing our own thing again. So you can see how it's different. It's so different, but it plays a role. If you've ever felt stressed because you have felt lonely, especially over COVID as well, if you felt lonely because there's a lack of socialization, that can be a stressful factor in your well-being. But at the same time, there can also be the stress of of having too much socialization. Maybe it's too much screen time. I say as I'm recording to a screen and you're watching on a screen. But you know, there's so many different things that play a role in our well-being. So over these 3 days and ongoing forever and ever, you will hear me talk about those different elements that play a huge role, that can, when you look at it as a whole, it might be a bit easier to see how you can't be perfect in it, because there are so many different elements. And if you are still trying to be perfect, you just look at it and go, okay, there's so much more I need to do and I need to nail and I need to get it completely right. Just take a moment. And if you're feeling that as you're watching now, take a moment, take a deep breath. Sense if there's overwhelm by trying to do that. And maybe ask yourself if that is what feels most useful for you. Because if you're sitting here and listening to me talk about how we have all of these different elements of well-being, and because they are always shifting and changing, it's impossible to be perfect, but you've just heard them as more elements that you can try to perfect. That is your first step, is to sit there and go, okay, check in if you feel overwhelmed. And check in why you feel overwhelmed. Is it because you were trying to be perfect at them even still? And we can't solve that as such in this live stream in itself, but we can bring awareness to it. it's a really powerful tool to bring awareness to go, okay, I was in a space and I recognized I was trying to do all the things perfectly. Great. And then I felt fucking overwhelmed. Holy shit. Right. Is the feeling of overwhelmed something that feels good for you? And if it is, I'd like to explore a little deeper. But if it isn't something that feels good for you, then let it be that first learning piece. Let it be enough. Let how you feel be enough to want to do a little bit better at being gentler on yourself and on your expectations. That should speak to the perfectionist in you if it's still lingering. You can do better at being gentler on the expectations you have on yourself. And in order to do that, you kind of just let them go. And again, there's a whole process to this as well. Sometimes it's required, there's more information that's required to help you see and have that moment of, oh, right, okay, got it. But this is just shedding light on it. That's the whole purpose of this particular live stream today, is to shed light on and that's why this whole series is called What About Wellbeing, is because when we step into perfectionism, it's usually the first thing that comes up. I don't know where to start, and I don't know how to start because I want to get it right. But who's to say what is right when we are human? We're ever evolving. Even our bodies, our cells are ever changing, literally ever changing. So how can you possibly get it perfect? How can you possibly justify putting that kind of pressure on yourself? And if you do have that paralysis by analysis where you go, well, it's too much and I don't know where to start, and you kind of dig your heels in, again, been there, totally been there. But if you kind of dig your heels in and go, this is too much because I can't do it right, so screw this and screw that, and I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because unless something breaks, then it's fine. Usually those are the moments where like we are getting the signals from the universe time and time again. They're like little signs. They're like, hey, look at this. Hey, what about this? And we kind of ignore them because, again, it may be too hard, maybe too much. And then the big metaphorical Mack truck comes and just kind of sweeps us off the road and says, hey, pay attention. So we're trying to avoid getting to that point. If we get to that point, we get to it. And that's fine, because that's part of the learning. That's part of the process. That's part of the growing. That's part of the journey. But we don't always have to get to that being completely taken out by the universe point in order to allow ourselves to shift our mindset. And when I talk about mindset, I'll probably talk about this more in posts and in other videos as well, because I feel like it's a really good one to clarify. When I talk about mindset, I don't mean just changing your mind. My practice of mindset is a lot more in embodiment and somatic shifting. So mindset and what's held in our bodies. So the link between our minds and our bodies, there is a huge link. There's a connection. But we can't just change our minds cognitively and then trust the rest to follow. That's a step. I don't think it's the first step. We can want to, but our feeling brain needs to feel like changing. And that's where we feel into our bodies on that somatic level. We can move, we can shift it. But if we're just sitting in the same emotions, the same feelings, and letting them stir and stir and stir and stir, beyond just that initial processing point, it is not serving us at all. We need to shift that in our bodies. So when I talk about mindset, I mean that whole process. not just cognitively changing the mind or setting the mind, if you take the words literally, but moving and shifting and connecting in with your body so that it can come through and have that change of set. So yeah, perfectionism. I identify as a recovering perfectionist myself. I still catch myself in certain ways. These videos, the live stream, but even the other videos that I do and share have been a great practice because I don't edit them. I don't go back through with that fine-tooth comb and cut out the ums and cut out the pauses where I am feeling into what comes next, what needs to be said next. I don't let myself stress about it because I value my experience way more than that. Whether that's I just don't have time to edit, nor do I want to spend my time editing. You too, Linda? I love that. But nor do I want to spend my time editing. So I get to a point where I go, you know what? It's just going to be what it is. I'll have an idea. I might have notes. For this one today, I didn't have written notes. I had mental notes. I knew what I wanted to talk about, so I trust what comes through. If I was allowing myself to practice in that space of perfectionism and trying to be perfect at it, at how I present, I would have cleaned up the butcher's paper that I've got behind me. But I'm working on shit. So you get to see that to a degree. You get to see that there's stuff happening. I would have worried more about the lighting, or I think this lighting is actually okay anyway, but I would have had specific notes or tried to script it. But when I script it, it doesn't serve me, and it definitely doesn't serve you. I've found the more I try to script something, and this is a really great analogy for life as well, the more I try to script something, the more I suck at it, more or less. The more that I just don't do as well with it, the more I lose my sense of presence in the moment, where I can respond to what's going on in the moment because I'm so focused on doing what I planned. Thanks, Linda. I'm so glad that you love what I have to share. It definitely helps for sure. It helps knowing, because it has to still land, right? Otherwise, what's the point? This isn't just to serve me to listen to my own voice. So I love that. Yeah, keeping it real. That's it. Because the more I do script things, and I learnt this when I first started teaching, to a degree, you do plan until you get used to timing and everything like that. That's definitely an important process. And I'm just saying this is what works for me. So it may not work for other people, but when I first started teaching, I would plan, and then I just slowly stopped planning because I realized the more I planned, the more I was worried about what was on the plan, rather than just going with something. Going with a feeling, going with what the vibe is in class of who's there, what I feel like they need because I've checked in and asked, either verbally to them or, universally, or the amount of times that I've said something, maybe during Shavasana or maybe during a video like this, where I haven't scripted it and it just comes out. And maybe I don't even notice it. Sometimes, I'll sit there, especially if it's during a class or a session, I'll sit there and I'll be like, why do I want to say that? That sounds crazy, or that sounds way over the top, or way too much into, this element of things, or whatever it is. But I trust that voice, and I might say it. And then if I say it, most of those times where I've had that real cognitive debate, and I still trust it anyway, and I still say it anyway, most of the time I'd have someone come to me afterwards and say, hey, when you said that, I felt like you were speaking to me. Or you don't even know how relevant it was when you said that. Or, hey, can you send me that quote? Sometimes it's a quote. Sometimes it's mostly not. So if I was worried about being perfect there, I wouldn't be of the best service possible to the people I serve, to you guys, to my clients, to my students, even to the people around me. So while I respect that perfectionism is a noble pursuit, and I respect and acknowledge that the intentions are usually pure, I suggest to you to consider how much you might be holding back on or holding back from allowing in your life that could be way more valuable, way more juicy, if you trusted listening. And it really comes down to trusting your inner knowing. When we're trying to be perfect, we stick to the script. When we practice trusting our inner knowing, some people refer to it as intuition. Sometimes it's inner voice, inner guidance, inner knowing. You get the drift. But when you practice trusting that and connecting with that, first and foremost, beyond the script, you can script things out for sure. Make notes. You know, like, especially if you're doing a speech, have notes. That's great, but trust your inner knowing. Trust you. Because when we're trying to be perfect, we're telling ourselves we don't trust ourselves. And we don't trust the universe. We don't trust anything around us. And maybe that's the case. I get it. Again, I've been there. I still have moments there. But it's the balance of learning to trust. And when it comes to our well-being, it's learning to check in. What will serve me most right now? Oh, it's reading a book? Great. I'm going to go do that. I'll lay out in the sun and I'll do that, or I'll curl up on the couch and do that. Perfect. Oh, it's journaling. Cool. Or it's something completely different that I don't normally do. I don't know what that's like, but maybe I'll try it. Didn't know that was going to come out of it, right? I couldn't have planned that. I learn as well, realizing that perfection, like when we're trying to be perfect, it's a lack of trust. I feel like I knew that. I feel like I've learnt that, and I maybe have taught that, but to say it in that way and the real understanding of, oh, that's actually what's going on a deeper level. So trust yourself. And if you don't know how to trust yourself, or if you don't know what it is you need to do to take care of your well-being, I use the word well-being. It's a really blanket word. I understand that. So again, in all of those areas of life, whatever it is that you feel, trusting or practice trusting that what you're doing is enough, or practice trusting that it's okay to do more for you, or it's okay to try something different if it's showing up and it feels like you want to try it. And remember that whatever you do isn't necessarily going to be the magic thing that fixes it all. That's not the idea. The practice is, or the benefit is in the practice, not the perfection, not in the big change. It's in the practice and the showing up for you. So trust you, show up for you, and don't place your value and your worth on this conditional thing like perfectionism, like being perfect. You deserve so much more than that. You deserve to feel like you love and accept yourself beyond that, regardless of whether you're perfect or not. Actually, no, you deserve to love and accept yourself because you are not perfect. And you deserve to know that you can be loved and accepted by others because you are you, who is not perfect. hope that feels like just getting the sense of like the weight lifting a little for you. I hope that feels like you can not carry that heavy load of your expectations around so much. Even if it's just the start of exploring that idea. That is my wish for you, that you feel a little lighter knowing that you don't have to be perfect. And that you can experience more of what you want to experience in that space of not being perfect, in that space of connecting in and trusting you. And the more you practice that, the more there is to trust in that. Very thought-provoking, Linda. Thanks for joining me. If you are watching the replay, again, I'd love to hear how it feels for you, what's come up for you. Please feel free to share, because you're welcome. Happy to plant the seed. Because that's it. Like, you know, the more that we share as well, the more we can plant seeds for each other just by default, not by even trying to, but just it makes us all go, what is it about that for me? And that's empowering. That's so empowering. There are still 2 days left of this live stream series. Tomorrow we are talking all about information overload and the overwhelm of finding what's relevant for us amongst all of the information out there and how to know what's best for us. It links into trying what we think is best for us and then not really feeling like we're getting anywhere. So we will be talking about that tomorrow, which I'm very excited to talk about because it is another really important piece in this whole well-being journey as well. And it's not too late if you have friends who you want to invite to listen to this live stream series, just feel free to invite them into this group. So you can invite them into the group and I'll get those notifications and I can accept them in and everything like that, so they can get the replays of this. These will be left up. I'll also be emailing them out with the link, and yeah, we'll explore it from there. But in the meantime, let me know what has come up for you throughout this, and maybe what comes up for you as you go about your day with that understanding around being perfect and whether that's really necessary or not. And I will see you here tomorrow about the same time, aiming for 10:45, 11 o'clock AEST. So yeah, I'll see you then.